I have played a lot of Souls-like games, even though I do not like them, and honestly, far too many of them feel like they were made after somebody played Dark Souls and changed the armor, added a dodge button, and called it innovation. But every once in a while, one of these games actually slaps and shows you do not always have to reinvent the entire genre. You just need to figure out what will actually make your own game stand out, and that's exactly why Mortal Shell 2 is so interesting. The original Mortal Shell had an incredible idea trapped inside a game that sometimes felt like it wasn't big enough to contain it. The shell system was brilliant and the atmosphere was incredible. The combat felt tight with a world that was strange, hostile, and genuinely memorable, but there were also obvious limitations. The game was small and progression felt restrictive. The combat felt deliberate to the point that it felt frustrating, and sometimes it felt less like Code Symmetry had created the Souls-like game they really wanted to create and more like they had to create the Souls-like they could afford to make. Mortal Shell 2 changes that in every way possible. This isn't simply just a sequel with prettier graphics and more bosses. Code Symmetry took the original concept and made it the game it always wanted to be. Now what you have is one of the most interesting Souls-like we have gotten this year. So let's talk about what Mortal Shell 2 actually does differently, what the combat is, why the combat is so much more aggressive, why removing stamina might be the game's smartest decision, and how the shell system has evolved. And most importantly, whether Mortal Shell 2 has finally escaped the shadow of the games that inspired it. The first thing you need to understand about Mortal Shell 2 is that this is a dramatically larger game. The original Mortal Shell was almost experimental. It was Code Symmetry saying we have an idea. Now Mortal Shell 2 feels like them actually building the game around that idea. The sequel expands the world considerably, introduces more exploration, more weapons, and significantly deeper character progression. There are 8 different shells to discover, each offering different abilities and playstyles, while the game also gives you a much larger selection of weapons and equipment to experiment with. This matters because the original game's greatest strength was always its central gimmick, where you weren't just simply equipping an armor, you actually became someone else. You see, a shell isn't just another piece of gear, it is essentially another identity, and Mortal Shell understands that this idea has far more potential than the first game was able to explore. This is where Mortal Shell 2 gets really interesting. Code Symmetry has done something that sounds almost sacrilegious in the Souls-like genre. They removed the stamina management system from the core combat loop, and to be honest, it works perfectly well. In most Souls-like, stamina is one of the system controlling almost everything you do. Your attack, your dodge, and every action is essentially a negotiation with that little green bar. But Mortal Shell 2 scraps all of that. Now you can fight, dodge, reposition, attack again, and the result is a much more aggressive combat system. But removing the stamina doesn't automatically make the game easier, it only changes what the game is testing. So instead of managing your stamina, Mortal Shell 2 tests if you can survive when the game refuses to give you a breathing room. The enemies are aggressive, encounters are chaotic, and because you aren't constantly waiting for your stamina to regenerate, combat becomes more about positioning, timing, recognizing enemy attacks, and understanding your own abilities. The faster combat is one of the sequel's biggest improvements, and this is where Mortal Shell 2 starts developing its own personality. This isn't Dark Souls combat without stamina, it is a different philosophy. The game wants you constantly moving, attacking, experimenting, and most importantly, it wants you to commit. Obviously, we cannot talk about Mortal Shell without talking about the shells. This remains the game's defining mechanic, and this time Code Symmetry has expanded it considerably. The shells aren't simply just different health bars, they influence how you approach combat. Some encourage aggression while some provide defensive advantages, while others dramatically alter the way you interact with enemies and their environment. The deeper progression systems gives you more reasons to actually invest in the shell you are using. This is important because one of the biggest problems with many Souls-like is that they give you dozens of weapons and upgrades that ultimately feel like variations of the same thing. But Mortal Shell 2 has a much stronger foundation. Your build isn't just you using a big sword, it is more of you choosing the shell, investing in abilities around the weapon. This distinction makes experimentation more meaningful, and with 16 weapons alongside the shell system, there is significantly more room for different builds than than there was in the original game. Soulslike exploration lives or dies on one question: is there actually something worth finding? Well, you see, Mortal Shell 2 understands that exploration needs to feel rewarding, so they made the entire world larger and added hidden areas including upgrades, weapons, shells, resources, and hidden bosses, which gives an entirely different experience. The sequel also leans much harder into interconnected exploration rather than simply pushing you through a sequel of increasingly difficult corridors. This changes the rhythm of the entire game, as you are not just moving from boss to boss, it makes you constantly think what is over there, and in a Souls-like game, curiosity is king. Do not mistake the faster combat as Mortal Shell 2 becoming some kind of power fantasy. This game is still brutal, enemies hit hard, healing is limited, mistakes are punished, and the game is deliberately bad at explaining certain systems to you. There are mechanics involving shell progression, seals, corruption, resources, and upgrades that you are expected to understand through experimentation rather than a giant tutorial explaining everything. And personally, I think that is part of the appeal. Mortal Shell 2 integrates confusion and uses it as part of its discovery. Not every system needs to be explained immediately. Sometimes you need to make mistakes and wonder what certain item does, or discover that the one thing you have been ignoring for 5 hours straight was actually incredibly important. The danger is that there is a fine line between mystery and inconvenience, and Mortal Shell 2 conveniently walks that line. If there is one thing Cold Symmetry absolutely understood from the beginning, it was atmosphere. Mortal Shell has always had this oppressive, almost nightmarish identity. It is dark fantasy without feeling like generic medieval fantasy. Everything feels deceased, ancient, corrupted, and slightly wrong. But Mortal Shell 2 takes that foundation and expands it into a much more bigger world. The visual representation has also taken a major leap forward, with Unreal Engine 5 helping the game deliver more detailed environments and lighting. Mortal Shell 2 isn't perfect, not even close. I have had odd camera behaviors, occasional hit detection problems, animation quirks, and some persistent bugs. There are even moments where certain upgrades can feel overwhelmingly powerful, but hey, that is a good kind of problem. So if you were looking for a flawlessly polished Souls-like, this is not it, but those problems do not erase what makes Mortal Shell 2 special. They remind you that you are still playing a game made by a relatively small studio in a genre increasingly dominated by enormous productions. This is where I think Mortal Shell 2 deserves its flowers, because yes, I think you can definitely see DNA of Dark Souls, Elden Ring's influence in the expanded exploration. You can definitely see the broader Souls-like design philosophy everywhere, but Mortal Shell 2 has something many imitators don't. It has a hook. The shell system, the aggressive stamina-free combats, the strange atmosphere, build experimentation, and the emphasis on discovery. These aren't just decorations placed around a Souls-like framework, they actually influence how you play the game, and this is the difference between inspiration and imitation. A Souls-like asks, how do we make our own version of Dark Souls? But a good Souls-like tries to see what they can do with this formula that From Software hasn't already done. And Mortal Shell 2 finally has an answer. So is Mortal Shell 2 worth playing? I think the answer is surprisingly simple. Yes. But not because it is the biggest Souls-like or because it has the most bosses, and certainly not because it somehow replaces Elden Ring, because the truth is, no game can replace Elden Ring. Mortal Shell 2 succeeds because it finally understands what Mortal Shell should have been in the first place. The original was a fascinating experiment, but the sequel is the realization of that experiment. It takes the shell mechanic and makes it meaningful. It removes stamina and builds combat around aggression. It expands exploration, adds more weapons, and gives you more ways to build your character. Create a world large enough for its ideas to breathe, and most importantly, it has identity. The Souls-like genre has now become crowded. Every year we get games trying to recreate the magic of Dark Souls. Most of them are competent, some of them are actually excellent, but very few of them have their own thing. Mortal Shell 2 does, and that's actually why this game could end up being remembered as something far more than just another Souls-like. It could be the moment Cold Symmetry stopped trying to prove that they could make a Souls game and started proving that they could make a Mortal Shell game. And for me, me, this is a much more exciting future, because if this is what happens when Code Symmetry takes everything they have learned from the first game and actually let that idea breathe, then Mortal Shell 2 isn't just the end of that experimentation, it is the beginning of a franchise finally becoming what it was supposed to be from the start. But hey, that's just me. Let me know what you guys thought about Mortal Shell 2. What did you love about the game? Or what did you hate about the game? Do you hate the fact that they removed the stamina bar? Let me know everything in the comment section, as I'll be down there waiting to respond to you guys. Please, if you enjoyed this video, kindly hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, and hit that notification bell icon so you can get notified when I upload videos like this. And until next time, peace and love.
Incredible.